Ultrawings just came out yesterday for the Oculus Rift. A game that, of course, is not trying to be Pilot Wings at all, in the slightest. The question is, what is it like to play, what's good about it, and what's bad about it? Well, let's find out in this episode of VR Bump, where we take a scalpel-like incision and peer deep inside the guts of VR games. First of all, let's talk about the good things, and the most strikingly good thing about this game is the visual style, quality and consistent visual execution. Now clearly it's not photoreal, but we're also not talking outright Jackson Pollock. They've gone for that middle of the road cartoony look where you have enough realism or highlighting on the texturing to draw you in and make it feel believable, but for the most part it is certainly very cartoony, very striking and very bright. This consistency is not only applied in the texture work but also in the 3D models, where you find certain environment models and little bits and bobs being quite low poly and almost looking like Super Mario on the N64, but then stuff you interact with and details in the cockpit are actually fairly detailed and wouldn't look too out of place in reality. And you can really tell that the developer has just focused on trying to mitigate some of the limitations of current gen VR headsets, namely that they have about 3 pixels of resolution. So by having everything be more cartoony and very focused in visual design, it just gets you past that hump of potentially not being able to see things clearly. Of a special note are the shadows in the cockpit, which look absolutely superb as you move around and the lighting glances across. And you notice this in driving simulators and just other games that have nice lighting and shadows in VR. It just really draws you into the world. But also the hillsides, which otherwise would be just completely straight edges, the developer has beveled the edges of the hillside, which greatly reduces the risk and the potential of getting aliasing artifacts and shimmer in the distance. So again, it's just really well thought out and really well executed by the developer visually in a way that all comes together to just suck you into the game, and despite it not looking anything like reality, feeling very solid and just makes you feel as if you're stuck inside one of those weird dreams you have when you binge play Super Monkey Ball for 14 hours. In terms of performance as well, the game ran completely fine, no issues with frame rate, and it just all seems very nicely optimised, and I wouldn't be surprised if this runs on people's systems that don't necessarily have the highest spec VR computers. Another really nice thing with this game is that it's very polished, almost as polished as a Victorian man's shoe before he goes out for a stroll down the boulevard. Particularly of note is just how you interact with the menu, how you can change the volume, the music, the various settings, and go through the missions and objectives on your little laptop. It's all just very clear, very obvious, and pretty seamless. They also use that almost VR trope now of sticking a object on your head to go and load a level. As found in Budget Cuts, The Lab, Fantastic Contraption, it just seems to be a way to load levels these days. It's just a trope that's come from nowhere, but it's a really good way of having a defined action before loading into something where you've got a potential of it taking a bit of time to load, and it gets the player ready to be moved to another quite drastically different place. So I think it's a really nice way of loading a level, and it's done really well in this game. Finally, on the positives, I'd say the actual core mechanics are really nicely done. That's the actual missions that you do and the way that you can do them. So for example, there's one mission where you're shooting a gun at balloons as you're flying along. It's really satisfying. The gun generally operates how you'd expect a gun to work, and it's just fun to do. Also the missions where you have to use your little tablet to take photographs of scenery. Again, really fantastic, really nice idea, something I've not seen in any other game. Obviously it's in games like Pokemon Snap, but not in this way where you are using VR fully and looking around and lining things up, and it just really again sort of brings you into the world and uses what VR can offer in a really nice and original way. And also the core flight dynamics and physics, though it's not X-Plane 11 simulation obviously, and it's very much more on the arcade side, it does have a reasonable amount of depth there to make the flying at a basic level quite satisfying and tricky to execute some of the missions where you've got to fly through gates and navigate the plane. Now, it's not as deep and complex as I think it could be, even on the arcade side, and I think it would have benefited from the plane being a bit more willing to stall, especially as it's got a arcade and a simulation mode. But you can't really complain about the handling physics and the general mechanics that are in the game. I think for what it is, it's really well done, and again, it's just really polished and cohesive and works with the other aspects of the game fantastically. Okay, so we've been saying positive things about this game for the past 5 or so minutes, and as a British person, that's unacceptable, and we now need to say some negative things to try and balance this ship. Move to the other side of the Titanic, hopefully it won't sink. Probably still will. So, the negatives. Well, the first and the biggest and the most irritating part of this game is that it's slower in progression than your average opera storyline. It's so painfully slow in terms of how each mission is dragged out with the aircraft. It's really clear, though everything that is in the game is super polished and really well executed, there's just a complete lack of content, and I'm pretty sure the developers just stretched everything out to try and get a longer playtime from a game that really probably should have had a shorter playtime and just been more varied and more quickly varied and more quickly introducing you to new things to keep it really interesting and sparking, exciting. Bizarrely, some of the actual missions where as I say, the taking photographs of landmarks or the shooting of objects from the plane is something that could actually be done more in the earlier stages and in a more varied way, with stuff positioned around the level in different ways, or just done in a way that's more entertaining. It's like they've got the fun missions there, and then they've just gone, oh yeah, you can have one of them, but you're going to have to wait 30 minutes to get the next one. And actually, when you do get the next one, it will probably be in a different plane, so where we've removed the gun and you shoot from the front of the plane. So we've removed half the interesting mechanic. Again, with the photography mechanic, it's fantastic shooting stuff in the environment, and I can't say enough for how good this mechanic is, but it's just not expanded on quick enough. Why not have some more wildlife in the world? And actually, that gets us onto this another point. The game is more sterile than an antiseptic kitchen wipe. There's literally no life in this game. It's dead. There's been some kind of bizarre cartoon zombie apocalypse here. So, it would have been really nice to use the camera to photograph different animals. Birds, sheep, alpacas, hedgehogs, anything. And they could have put like really good humour into the design of these animals. It could have been really minimal cartoon style animals that are just that sort of depressed, comical look on the faces, and it would have just made things feel so much more lively and involving. And I think that is one of the big problems with this game, is just, as I say, how sterile it is. It is really well executed, polished, serene, and it looks good, but it's basically, it's almost like corporate culture wrapped up in a very nice cartoony game. It has that weird, dead feeling to it, unfortunately. It just doesn't feel alive. Even where the developers tried to inject some humour with there's a tannoy guy that says well done sarcastically for completing levels, that just feels as if he's repeating himself, and it just doesn't have the character in the voice acting or the execution to make it feel genuine and not just some pre-recorded game sound effect. I mean, a perfect example is if you just contrast it to the accounting demo, and it's just night and day. Now, obviously, it's not easy to be a good voice actor, but it's stuff like that would just, at potentially not a large cost to the developer, I think would really elevate this game. It's just those little small bits, and I really do get the impression that the game just needs that additional content to make it feel rich. If you have these cartoon-style games that are more on the arcade side and are trying to appeal to that more casual arcade player, they have to be, in my opinion, really content-rich, really rewarding in presentation, and really propel you through the game, almost barraging you with content, so you always feel like there's something exciting to do. And after just an hour and a half or so of playing this, the game moved from being, this is really fun, I'm enjoying what's going on, to this is actually starting to become a bit of a chore, and I'm now just getting into the pure completionist mentality rather than actually enjoying consuming the content of the game. I do feel a little bit bad saying that, because it just seems to me as maybe the developer ran out of time with this, and that everything that they have done in it is really bloody superb, or at worst is a very good first attempt at trying to do something that's not really being done before, hasn't been established in video games. And though it's not perfect, I really like the fact that you can use the touch controllers to interact with the cockpit, and that does again add a lot to the immersion, seeing your hands in the game and using dials and knobs in the virtual vehicle. It just pulls you in, and it's really satisfying at a basic level. Now, the reason why I say the flight controls using the touch controller is not perfect is because when you're holding onto the yoke, it constantly vibrates and gives haptic feedback. So it's hard to tell sometimes if you're at the full extent of a yoke, especially if you're not looking at the yoke whilst you're flying. And so you end up going past the full extent, and then you have to pull the joystick forwards more than you expect. So when you get to the more tricky levels of flying through gates and doing tricky landing maneuvers, it's really hard to fly using the yoke, so you end up just resorting back to the joystick, and then the joystick unfortunately has a absolutely ginormous dead zone, again making it very hard to be super precise and delicate. But with a little bit of tweaking, I think it could work absolutely fine, and it's a very good first attempt, as I say. Also, though the presentation of the content is very slow, I have really enjoyed this, and at a basic level, the feeling of being in a vehicle and flying and being above the ground and just getting that feel of flight is there and done fantastically well. So the VR component is done almost flawlessly, and it really does leverage what you get from VR. Also, as someone that's effectively been a virtual reality test monkey from Virtuality to the DK1, DK2, CV1 and the Vive, it's easy to forget that impact that VR can have that I think these early titles can leverage. So despite them in some ways lacking content, if someone had just bought a Oculus Rift and popped this on, it's going to be completely mind-blowing. And that mind-blowing initial impact of VR will probably carry them through the game and keep it more interesting and fresh than it would be for someone that's been heavily exposed to VR and is looking more critically at the actual game mechanics and the core goings on in the game than the overall experience. And that leads us on towards the final conclusion, which is that I think this game is going to be really enjoying for a lot of people, but more so for people that are new to VR, and more so to people that just want to approach it in a really casual, go through the missions, don't expect too much, and just relaxed way. I really hope the developer adds in more content later on, and I also am really interested to see what this developer does in the future, because they have done some genuinely original and unique things with this game, which I think should be applauded and celebrated. That is our review of Ultrawings. It has been said those that click the subscribe button are indeed the best people on planet Earth. Also, you can like the video, and underneath the video is a description box which contains the good and bad points in bullet point form, as well as links to our Twitch channel where we stream these games as they come out. So, thanks for watching, see you in tomorrow's video, goodbye.